All right, on to the little forwards or the small forwards, as some call them. Harrison Barnes. I think what'd you give him? An A minus?
I gave him an A minus, which I feel like was the most contentious grade given out. Maybe A minus because I think, just in short, I think he's proven that he's the third most important player on the team. And we talked about him having less of a load and watching his stats fall. That shouldn't be an issue. I think the 3-point shooting, the start he had, was undeniably disappointing. He also looked lost kind of at the beginning of the season in terms of that adjustment, but that didn't even go too long. That early season slump outside of the 3-point shooting really was not that extensive. It was just glaring because the Kings started 0-4, and Harrison Barnes had been one of the more steady presences on this team for the last couple of years. I think that played a lot into it. And at the end of the day, I think Harrison Barnes is the type of guy that Mike Brown has started at times to use him with De'Aaron Fox to play with the second unit at times to kind of level things out there. He's the type of guy that when things get stagnant or when things kind of get a little choppy on offense, he'll take it to the rim and get to the line or something like that. Whether they needed paint touches in particular or not, he'll find a way to kind of he almost kind of just shakes the etch a sketch. You just kind of start over. And I think for all of those reasons and the fact that he's providing a championship pedigree and experience that is an intangible trait, I don't disagree with. It's hard to prove, but I just think all those things together culminate into the fact that he's the third best player, not the third best player. I don't know if he's the third best player in terms of like just skill level, but importance to the team. He's the third most important player on the team, in my opinion. And that might have something to do with the fact that he doesn't really have, like, if he gets hurt, and you're like, how realistic is it that you're going to keep Terrence Davis starting at the 3 or whatever the deal, or Herter starting at the 3 and TD at the 2? Like, you're going to be forced into situations. So that factors into it. And I don't want to give him an A minus because of that, but I just think the other reasons kind of stand out to me, at least.
I agree. I could fall into that B plus category, but I mean, Harrison Barnes is Harrison Barnes. He's tried and true professional, right? And still even can be a go to scorer. Even though I was kind of saying at the earlier this season or before the season started, I'm like, yeah, he's gonna do really good as a fourth scoring option. Like, he's still a guy that, man, like if you need a bucket, you go to this guy or he gets to the line and just his professionalism. I don't know if he's playing like an A minus player, but also you don't really need him playing like at the top. I don't know. It's weird. He's a tough one for me, I guess, because it's like, he's doing
Yeah.
good in his role, but it is a reduced role at the same time. And so maybe it's different from years past where he was like that second scorer. But I mean, he's doing good in the reduced role, still shooting that 3 ball well, and just being that vet on this team that he always has been. So I'm good with an A minus really for that. I mean, Harrison Barnes being Harrison Barnes, right?
Mm-hmm. And also, I would just say that, like, he's the type of guy that it's like, I don't know if you've ever worked at like a restaurant, but you have like that guy that comes in, he just started working there, and he just comes in, and every day he'll just be like, "What do you need me to do?" Because he just
Yeah,
doesn't have a role in the kitchen or whatever the deal is. Like, what do you need me to do? And it's just
yeah,
like whatever it is. Because if you look at Harrison Barnes' like game log, it's like, oh, he had a 6 rebound game, and then he'll have like a 1 rebound game. But then the difference between that will be like, oh, but he scored 11 points in that first game, and then scored 20 in the next game. He finds
yeah,
different things to do, and then like the first time they played against Toronto, and then I think it was the January win against the Lakers. Like, Harrison Barnes was great in that game because he guarded Pascal Siakam in the second half against Toronto, and like was part of the reason that he was not a factor in the second half against the Kings. And it was a little bit of the same. He was guarding like LeBron all game, and I think in that Laker game I'm talking about, I think he won the Defensive Player of the Game chain. He's just constantly doing different things, and maybe you can almost say that you can almost view it as an inconsistency thing for the reason it's like, oh, the rebounding numbers vary, the scoring numbers vary, but he finds a way to make that impact in a similar way that we'll talk about with Trey Lyles. It's almost just like he finds where the gap is and he fills it in.
Yeah.
He's like putty. You just put him in, and he'll fill in whatever the hole is. You just sand it down a little bit and figure it out. You know.
Yeah.
And I think in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, that's so important for a team. And I think come playoff time, and that people maybe will be able to recognize that a little bit more. Not to say that people don't recognize that. I think Barnes gets a lot of credit for that, but I think for all those reasons, I give him an A minus. And I'd totally be. I'm not like if someone was like, no, he's a B plus or he's even a B. Like I totally get where you're coming from. Totally get where you're coming from. It really
Yeah.
depends on how you view that like slump in the shooting kind of aspect of things. Because even like he was great in January from three, but I think in February he's also closer to 30%. So
But I'm gonna go with you with the A minus. I think Barnes has been great this year. I really like Barnes. Like he's not throwing up like crazy numbers, which makes me want to dip his grade to the B plus. But it's like you don't need him to have the big numbers, and he's doing well in his role. He's doing super well, and yeah, he's had like on and off, but he's there every night. He's a guy who hardly misses games. A guy that you can have out there with any lineup, really. And he's going to play well. He's going to be a positive player on the floor. And he's a huge part of it. And he's like that only guy at the small forward position too. It's like him. Like, yeah, we're like, I'm like, who
yeah,
else? Like Paula and Kessler or KE, KZ and KE.
KZ and K. Yeah, I like that. And
Yeah,
HB.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, you kind of have to. Yeah, she's an A minus. That dude. I'm
I
with
do
you.
think the lack of depth behind him has to factor in.
Oh,
It has
100.
to.
It has to.
As we will demonstrate with these grades,